Sorry about the start of that video, but we've actually got the man in person sitting in the front here, so he's going to be joining us on the panel. So maybe a couple of comments initially from me. I was fortunate enough to join Salesforce just over 9 years ago and started a business here in Europe, and we had a very simple idea, and that idea was, why couldn't business applications be like Amazon? That's how we started the company, with just that one vision, that one idea. And as we've seen the world progress, and we've seen the advent of Facebook and social and mobile, we reinvented the company really about 3 years ago when we saw the Facebook revolution. And when you think, when you look at those Facebook statistics, it's kind of amazing what's happened there. When you've got, close on 1 billion users, and 50% of them log in every day. That's one person in 13 on the planet log onto their Facebook account every day. Quite remarkable. 50% of them who connect are mobile. So we've seen this mobile, this social, this revolution. And from a business point of view, we think that strategy is moving into both business, into government, and into non-for-profits. We believe that's the consumerization of IT. Just like Amazon happened, just like Facebook, and what Salesforce has been delivering is those technologies to you in local government, central government, and non-for-profits. But of course you have some special requirements and some special challenges, and what we wanted to do in this session in particular is to try and bring them out and try and have a discussion so that we can share in this panel some of those issues. And so I'd like to welcome on stage my three panelists here who are going to take some of the questions. I'll get them to introduce themselves as opposed to me giving them glowing reports. So perhaps if Vivek, Phil, and James, if you can come and join me on stage. And what I'll do is I'll get each of them to, if they would, introduce themselves, what they're focused on, and what they've been working on at Salesforce, which will hopefully trigger some thoughts and questions from yourself. And then we'll hopefully allow you to then challenge them on what they've been doing, what challenges they face, and where they see what they've been doing moving forward. So I think we have a roaming mic first of all. So maybe James, we sadly chopped you off in your prime there on the video. We lost the beginning. So perhaps you'd tell us a little bit about what you've been doing and your relationship with Salesforce.
Sure. So, my name is James Herbert, as you saw from the video, and it's probably the most sense I've spoken in a while on that bit when it fell. I was the former, I have to say, so I'm talking about what I did when I was there, the former head of customer and business services and IT at Windsor and Maidenhead. And I think it's fair to say that in the public sector space we were, and they still are, one of the pioneers in cloud and as-a-service technology. I don't know if we were the first major implementation of Salesforce, but we were certainly one of the first in the sector. And we're really doing some very interesting stuff, and they still are, around the Force.com platform as well, which would be good if we can talk about that today. So I have since moved on, and before that I was at the Cabinet Office where I helped write the cloud strategy. So.
Great. Well, it's great to be here. In my former role, I worked for President Obama as his Chief Information Officer, driving the tech strategy for the U.S. government. And I just recently joined Salesforce.com, focused on emerging markets.
Thank you. Phil Shoesmith, Head of IT for the Alzheimer's Society, and hard to compete with that. I used to work for Obama. I work for the Alzheimer's Society. We're the largest charity in the UK fighting for the rights and well-being of people with dementia, all forms of dementia, not just Alzheimer's, and their families. We have been Salesforce users since 2008, initially as a tactical solution, but as of last year, signing a 5-year strategic deal to put a number of core business lines through Salesforce over the next couple of years.
So perhaps I can kick off. And first of all, I think Vivek's been very particularly modest, given that he was President Obama's effectively CIO, and I think saved $3 billion. I think came out of the budget in a pretty quick period of time. So we're very honoured to have him here. We're delighted that he's going to share some of his experiences that he experienced in the US government. But perhaps I could start with, if you allow me to start a couple of questions, I'd like to start with James, actually. James was pretty pioneering at Royal Borough of Windsor. in actually getting Salesforce in, where a lot of government bodies have been a little bit resistant to go to public cloud, whether it be fears about data residency and so on and so forth. And you overcame that, James. I mean, how did you manage to do that? How did you manage to say, right, I'm going to go for Salesforce, I'm going to implement something, and I'm going to get it done?
Okay, so I think the first thing I should say is it was a number of us, including my former boss, Anthony Kemp. I don't know if he's in here, but anyway. I think what we did was it was about the data, really, that we were using it, first of all, and the purpose we were using it for. So I think we had to be kind of realistic about the level of change, the risk appetite, etc. So when we originally implemented it, we implemented it as a case management system across our internal support service functions. So we already had a kind of HR system and our finance system, but we'd centralised that, and we didn't have any way of what I call customer servicising the internal services. So we needed a way for people to raise cases, to self-serve, and to track and monitor cases as well. So that was a kind of quite an uncontroversial place to put it in there. And what I would say, what I learned from, because I learned things that went well and things that didn't go so well, I think what I learned is that you've got to learn as an organisation. So part of this is you've got to put it in somewhere and you've got to pilot it somewhere. And funny enough, we've ended up not using it for that so much for that specific purpose, but for something else which I think is far more powerful. But if we hadn't have just made that move and generated a little bit of momentum from our cloud strategy, I don't think we'd have got to that point. So I don't even want me to talk about what that other thing was. But
well, what was the major barrier to getting started? What was the biggest issue?
Well, it was kind of partly cultural because it was tied up in a change of people's jobs and a change of a way of delivering those kind of internal services. So part of it was, I guess, if I'm paraphrasing, probably a bit unfairly, but you know, I'm an HR professional, I'm not a customer service agent, I don't want to get tracked and monitored. So it was kind of seen as a big brother tool for management to keep an eye on staff. So that was one thing we learned through doing it again, that you wouldn't necessarily deliver it and sell it in that kind of way. But I think what we learned was that you've got to get people playing with it, get some people trained on developing it, and get a number of people in the organisation familiar with it and what it can do in its broadest context. And suddenly the kind of momentum for it generates itself. So by the time we came to do that video, it had turned from a push to a pull. So there were parts of the business saying, well, if you're doing that with chatter in the contact centre, why can't we have something like that,
right.
Et cetera, et cetera. But I think the power of it for a local authority is that local government, from an IT point of view, is basically split into two camps over the last 10 years. So it's gone either down the kind of big ERP, CRM, trying to consolidate, trying to integrate everything, which kind of brings benefits, but it's very expensive and clunky, or they've just got hundreds of point solutions that are all different and don't work together. And what we realised really quickly, or quite quickly, was the power of the platform, of the Force.com platform, and actually selecting strategically a development platform so that you can start building stuff that works together, that works with the social media, the websites, etc., whilst you're sorting out some of your other issues. So that's where it kind of moved across to.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Perhaps I can move to Vivek. I mean, I don't know where you would start in the US government trying to put your arms around the whole move from what they had traditionally to the start of a cloud infrastructure. I mean, how do you get started, and how do you take $3 billion out of costs so quickly? I mean, how did you get started?
Well, so it's actually interesting. I still remember my first day at the White House as I walked in. After the president appointed me, my team came up to me and they said, "Congratulations on your new job," and handed me a stack of PDF documents. And they said, "Well, you're now responsible for $80 billion in IT spending. Here are $27 billion worth of IT projects that are years behind schedule and hundreds of millions of dollars over budget." And then the next thing that happened is I realized the way in the government mobile devices were assigned was based on the square footage of your office or how long you'd been in government. And I looked at that challenge and recognized that there was no way that one person was going to be able to take on $80 billion of IT spending. So the first thing I did is I basically decided to shine light on taxpayer spending. So within 60 days, we launched an IT dashboard where you could actually see every single dollar in IT spending across the U.S. government. But more importantly, what I decided to do was to take the picture of every CIO in the U.S. government and put it right next to the projects they were responsible for, and launched a public dashboard, and that showed how those projects were doing in terms of cost, schedule, and what they actually promised. And then I decided to take a picture of the president looking at that dashboard and blogged about it. And literally moments after I did that, I got all these phone calls from CIOs who were like, oh my God, for the first time, my cabinet secretary has asked me to come into the office and explain why this project is red. So I think first, it was just moving away from this culture of faceless accountability that you have in the public sector so often, to a culture where we're going to actually hold people accountable for IT projects. Then the second thing, as we looked at that spending, we realized that $24 billion in that spending was just on infrastructure. And we were spending billions on these ERP systems, right? To give you a data point, one of these ERP systems was in the Department of Defense, where the government had spent 10 years and $1 billion, and it just didn't work. It didn't work. Another project we looked at the Department of Interior, after 5 years, what the government got from an army of consultants was a book. What it was blueprints, architectural drawings, business process re-engineering. And I looked at that, and I was just appalled at how we were wasting billions and billions of dollars in taxpayer money. That is one of the reasons I decided to institute a cloud-first policy, to get away from this culture of asset ownership and building these multi-billion-dollar IT projects that actually never delivered, to a culture where we would basically say, look, you know, we've seen a fundamental shift in technology, and you pointed this out with companies like Amazon, where the greatest innovation in government was happening in the 1960s. You had to go to the public sector to get access to the greatest technology. Then in the 1980s, all that innovation moved to multinational companies, where the greatest technology was actually in the hands of multinationals. And then in 2005, something spectacular happened, which is all that innovation moved to the consumer web. And what you see today, whether you're an NGO or a government, is there's a huge gap between how citizens or people access technology in their everyday life versus what they experience in the enterprises. And that is a gap that we try to close, and started killing all these projects, and we were able to save $3 billion in 6 months just by going after this wasteful spending.
Well, presumably you must have had a lot of resistance from the computing industry, who were taking those billions of dollars out of the U.S. taxpayer, right? The hardware vendors, the software vendors who were traditionally, you know, feeding at that trough. Did you come under pressure from the status quo, as it were?
Absolutely. I mean, I would go in front of Congress to testify, because I went through plenty of congressional hearings. And every time I would meet senators and members of Congress behind closed doors, they would tell me, you have no idea how many people have asked us to fire you, right? Because this is real money. And so, you know, one of the other things that we did is we halted $30 billion in out years of all ERP systems. So we literally put a halt, no new spending on ERP systems. And that sent shockwaves to the entire IT industry.
Wow.
And the reason was because in government, if you think about the incentives for most IT companies, it's to actually win that contract. Once they win that contract, what is the incentive? It's to actually make sure you're increasing the margins by putting more people on that project and making sure it never ends. It's not creating value. And I had a very simple question, which is, I want to get value the day I sign the contract, not 5 years later, and I don't want a book, you know, that cost us, in terms of taxpayers, $50 million. Right. And that was a fundamental shift in terms of the thinking within the public sector.
Well, I'm sure we're going to come back to Vivek, but I want to bring in Phil, who's been visionary in bringing Alzheimer's into the Salesforce community. Phil, there's a lot of not-for-profits in the audience.